Hi everyone, and welcome to the last video in a mindset for mixing and production. If you've not watched all the previous videos, we're going to be referencing them along this video, and they are the precursor and the fundamentals to all the things that you should be doing and the way you should be thinking when you're producing an electronic music track. In this video, we're going to be making a crossover commercial piano house type track and making it in preparation for sending it to a vocalist. And if you don't play the piano, this is a great video for you to watch as well, because it shows you exactly how I do it. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry for the title. It's probably some kind of gimmicky title to get you in, but this is going to be a great video. I'm going to show you how to make a record from scratch, how to think when you're starting a record. We're going to go through the whole process to mixing it down and having a release ready track that you can send to a vocalist, or not if you want an instrumental. It's going to be in depth, and it works alongside my one-to-one mentorship. I've mentored hundreds of people, and most people seem to have the same problems. We have to take them back to the fundamentals. We have to create a roadmap. We have to define their sound and who they are, and change the way that they think when they start making a track, mixing a track, and finishing a track. If you are watching on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe. It really, really helps me. And if you are interested in the one-to-one mentorship, you can DM me on social media or email info@subtonemusicacademy.com. The link will be below this video. And I've helped hundreds of people get their tracks sounding amazing and signed to the labels of their choice. So let's have a listen to the track. This is the pre-master, and I'll do a bit of a DJ master on this afterwards and then send this out to the vocalists. I think it's really important that you get something as good as possible before you send it to a vocalist, virtually finished. And the reason for that is I want them to feel the journey of the record. I know some people just put like blocks of a verse, chorus. Don't do that. Get the energy of the song, get the full song together before you send it to a vocalist, because you want them to feel the journey. You want them to feel the build-ups, and as the energy grows, because you want that energy put into their voice, which will make your track not sound like it's the same all the way through. You know, it's really important, this. And I see too many people send these songs to people that haven't got a journey, and the vocals just come back at like 70% of what they could have been. You need to inspire the vocalist, not just if she's already agreed to it, but if you're trying to get someone to sing on your track, you need to make sure that this song sounds as good as possible. So let's have a listen to the song. It's a Sonny Fodera style track, big piano, quite clean drums. I've still made it a little bit more clubbier. You might be saying to yourself, oh, it needs a little bit more, and you're right. The thing is, when you're sending tracks to vocalists, it needs to be a journey. You need to have the movement, but you don't want to have too many cross melodies in there or too much going on which leads the vocalist. So what I would do is I would do something like this. And I can foresee in this track that I'm going to get the vocals, I'm going to chop them up, I'm going to create the atmospheres and the ambience of just like a or just words just kind of chopped up in the sampler and loads of reverb and stuff that all sits in the background that gives this track another dimension on top of what I've already got. But I can see that already. I can forward think that that's what it's going to be like. And what you've done is you've given the vocalist, you've given them a journey because the energy is building up from the first beat to the last beat, so they can create a journey themselves with the vocal that they're going to write. What I would do is I would send it off to a vocalist. I would choose the right vocalist straight away that's right for this kind of genre that I think sits well. And I always think it's better to let them come up with the melodies. And when they come back and they send us a song back, we'll go backwards and forward with some rough ideas. I'll say what I like and what they like. And then they will record the final vocal, or we'll go into a studio and I'll book a studio in Liverpool or Manchester or London, and we'll go in and we'll record it there. And then we'll get a load of extra things like ad-libs and stuff that I really like. I like to do it this way. I like to do it this way because we've got a rough idea together first of all, which hasn't committed the singer to spending time in the studio or having to do the best performance. We're just coming up with melodies and vocal ideas and lyrics. And then it gives them a bit of time to practice song in between us agreeing what we like and going to a studio and recording it. And I always think it's a much better performance when they've practiced it. There is a few people like Lisa Millett where you go in the studio with her, you write the song together, or she writes the lyrics and the melodies and bang, she does it straight away. But generally, I like the singer to go away, practice the song a little bit, and then when we get into the studio, I'll use somebody like Chris Taylor at Kempton Street Studios in Liverpool, who just works with Coldplay and records vocals all day long, and we'll get the best out of the singer. So think about that. Once we've got the vocals down, I'll then come back to my studio and we'll have a look and see if we can amend the music around the vocals. I see this a lot of the time where people have got the vocals, it sounds pretty good, and you just think, well, if you'd taken a bit of time and changed a couple of notes to go with the vocal a bit more, or did a question and answer with the music and the vocal, or added another synth around the melody line to keep it interesting, that song could have gone to the next level. You know, always be thinking like, how can I make this better? And getting a vocal on top of a track you've already done, for me, is definitely not the end. There is definitely always another session in there for the music after the vocals in there. Before we start, I want to run over Metric AB quickly. This is your number one tool. It's great for referencing. And my references are like MK, Sonny Fodera type stuff. That kind of record is what I'm looking for. The reason I'm using Metric AB, which is a reference plugin, I can level match the references to my track. And I'm using this to see if my track has the same feeling, has the same punch, has the same dynamics, same bottom end, same top end. And it's really good for later on where you're kind of thinking to yourself, right, what would the energy of my track be like to the energy of this track if I played it afterwards? And this is really good. It's a really good tool. And I'm going to go into this more later on. But the reason why this is also a great tool is we can check the correlation and the phase with it. We can check the stereo imaging. We can check the loudness, but I don't generally use this. But one of the other main things I use this for is that we can isolate areas. And if you're learning how to produce right now and you're trying to get your mixes better, this tool here is amazing. Let me just play you my mix and show you what I mean. This is really good. So we can check all those frequencies and A/B those frequencies to your references. And once the level match, this is an amazing tool for training your ears and tuning in, because sometimes the whole mix is too distracting for us whilst we're learning to be able to tune in to certain frequencies. Just to let you know, I'm using all Arturia V Collection plugins for this track. It's generally what I use a lot of. You know, I will use the synths and the Moog and everything else normally, but I find that Arturia are more house music and melodic house and techno, as opposed to just using the same sound you hear all the time with things like Serum and Diva. But I do use them quite a lot as well. But when it comes to more house music, I feel that, you know, the emulations of these old synths are closer and they feel a bit better to me than any preset and any other kind of VST plugin. And like I said, they are emulations, and you've got loads of different plugins in there, from like the Jupiters to the Prophets to the Buchla to the Moog, etc., etc. There's loads of things in there, and there's loads of presets that you don't hear, and I'll always go to them to try and get a sound that's a little bit different, get a preset up, and then try and change it to make it my own. But the Arturia V Collection, amazing for house music and melodic techno. Okay, so if you're not a musician and you're just trying to get your chords together, I would recommend finding somebody you can work with who is a good keyboard player, because you can tell when someone's kind of drawn the chords in, or it's the same MIDI pack that people use in. The thing about using a keyboard player that you can work with is they can always add something that makes it sound more musical. Of course, the key to it is knowing what you want. First of all, do not expect a keyboard player to come in here and read your mind. You have to kind of sing back to them what you're looking for. You have to give them reference tracks. You have to give them sounds. You have to ask them questions like why does that chord change sound like that? And them say, oh, because it goes to like a diminished chord or whatever it might be. But you need to be prepared and have in your head what you want. You need to have a kind of melody idea, a kind of change idea. You know, a lot of the times, you know, like with this, I would get the guy to come in and I would have the piano sound ready and I want it to go ding 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 ding. I can't play piano. I can't sing either. But you've got to know what you want and you've got to know how it works, and you've got to be prepared for when that keyboard player comes in, the musician comes in, to tell them exactly what you want. And the thing is, if you've got somebody you've worked with a few times, they'll just come up with, you'll get what you want and say to them, what would you do? Or try and come up with some variations of that. And that's where the magic happens. I've got a guy called Ross Munro, at Ross Munro Music on Instagram. I have to be with him when he does it. And I think you should be there with them all the time. I know people who work with people over the internet, and it's a hit and miss whether it works, because you're telling them what you want, but you're not actually there. And I think you need to be there to go, oh no, try this. Oh no, go down. Oh no, go up. And find someone who lives near you. They don't have to be into dance music. Ross isn't into dance music, but I do have to be with him while we're writing together, because it's all coming from my head and what I want and what I feel to be right. And the good thing about electronic music is you can play almost every instrument with a plugin. Okay, one of the great things about working with other musicians, like with keyboard players, is there's a magic that comes from collaboration and working with them. And like me, I'm from Manchester, and we always have musicians coming in all the time, keyboard players and bass players and everything else. And because I live in Wales now, about 2.5 hours from any major city, you know, I have to import the musicians to come and play with me from Manchester and Liverpool. And I'm just isolated working on my own, and it's really good to bounce ideas off other people, even if you can play the keys yourself. Okay, so whenever I start my tracks, or whenever you start your track from now on, we're going to start with just a kick, an offbeat hat, and a clap, and that's it. Put a bit of reverb on the clap, and just because we don't want to create a groove or a melody with the drums that leads the music, it's better to add it later on. So let's have a listen here what I've got. Very clean, very Sonny Fodera, very much that kind of music. I have put a reverb on the clap, but we're not going to add any effects till the end of the arrangement. And the reason for that is because I'm trying to teach you to make sure that your track is 90% there before you add anything to it. And that's because the sample choice and the recording quality is the key to a great mix, not any plugins, not even EQ. Before we start, I want to run over how I make music and how I want you to make music whilst you're learning. It's really important. The most important thing in the track is what you should be working to. So for example, if I had a vocal, so everything has to work to the vocal. In this case, we're writing a song for a vocalist. So what's the most important thing? Well, that's going to be the piano in this case. And I call the piano lead one. And then I add sounds to that piano sound and to that melody based upon the rhythm of the piano and the melody and the notes of the piano, the frequencies of the piano, and the position in the mix. I'm always thinking about the next sound that I'm adding as a matter of importance. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, I'm quickly going to refresh you on the questions you want to be asking yourself when you're adding a new sound to a track. Now, we go more in depth in this earlier on in the course, but I'm going to run through these if you're watching one of my videos for the first time. Okay, these are the questions you want to be asking yourself. First of all, have you gain staged? Remember, I gain stage everything to -12. That's with the fader at 0 and no plugins on. That always gives me about 6 dB of headroom at the end. And you can go and watch the gain staging video for that. If I'm adding a sound, is it genre appropriate? You know, we see this so many times with my clients where they come and they've added something and the sound is not really genre appropriate. So for example, let's just say the piano in this case, the piano may be more of a like kind of Afro house piano as opposed to a Sonny Fodera piano. And you've got to ask yourself, is it the right piano line and is it the right piano sound for this genre of music? Have I done frequency and character recognition? Remember, this is the most important part of the whole course. If you don't know frequency and character recognition, you don't know how to mix a track, you don't know how to use a compressor or any of the other effects that we're going to use. So identify the low, the middle, and the high frequencies of the sound. Identify the attack, the body, the release, stroke tail, and the tone of the sound. When you add it to the mix, when you add this sound, how is it affecting all of the other sounds in the mix, in the same frequency spectrum? Identify the position of this sound in the stereo field and depth of field. Where is it? Remember, I've got a great setup here. I've got a great depth of field, which means forwards and backwards, and stereo field, left and right. When I'm mixing, I'm asking myself, what is the position of it in the mix? I've got 20 hertz here. I've got 20,000 hertz here. I've got the mids. I've got the sides. I've got the left. I've got the right. I've got forwards in the mix and I've got backwards in the mix. And I've got to ask myself, what is the position of this new sound that I'm putting into the track and how is it affecting everything else or interacting with everything else in the mix? Does it have the wow factor? Now, we're making a piano house track today, but you know, when it comes to tech house and more things like that, you know, that lead sound, if you've got one, it needs to be something that I've never heard before. It needs to be a killer sound and a killer melody. We talk about flow earlier on in the course, and that's why we create our sample packs, and that's why we never look for sounds whilst we're producing a record. We find the sounds before we start producing a record, because the biggest killer of creativity and flow is looking for samples and sounds. And if you've got your own sample pack with sounds that you know are, I've got the wow factor or a 10 out of 10 sample, then you know you're not going to be killing your flow. Leads on to, is it a 10 out of 10 sample, sound, recording choice, or can you find a better option? You know, if it's not, go and find a better option. Remember, we'd rather have one clap than 4 claps. Do you need a supporting sound? Okay, well, sometimes you really like the tone of a sound that you've got, you really like something there, and it might be quite high up and the bass is a bit low and there's a gap between the bass and that lead sound. You might need to put a supporting sound with it. Very mindful when you're doubling a sound up about phasing and everything else. Check mono compatibility. I use the mono here. Check the phase correlation. Can we adapt the MIDI length and velocity, ADSR or synth, to make it fit the mix better at source? Remember, every effect that we do and we add to a sound has a side effect. And what we need to say to ourselves is, can I treat this sound at source? You know, with the length of the MIDI, with the velocity of each separate notes, with the volume of a piece of vocal that is really hitting the compressor more than everything else. Go into the original sound, yeah, whether it be a plug-in, a recording, and try and amend it without getting the side effects of a compressor or whatever else you're trying to add to that sound. Are there cross rhythm / melodies? Well, in this track there's not, but you need to ask yourself that, because I see it too many times. What lead number is it? We talked about this before. And because we're working and we're starting with lead 1 and lead 2 and lead 3 and lead 4 and so on and so on, it's easy to make decisions on the new sound that we're bringing in and how it interacts with everything else. And is it good for the mix or is it bad for the mix? Because what's most important are the leads above it. Remember, it's 100 times harder to write a lead sound to a groove than it is to write a groove to a lead sound and a melody. It's why most people who come to me say, I just can't finish tracks and they've got 100 tracks on the computer. It's because they start the track the wrong way. From now on, we're starting with the lead.